One Step Ahead by Lundquist and Beslick.
Welcome to One Step Ahead Radio. Another session, another week. The world is moving fast, and we are trying to understand along the way what's really going on. And this week we have a special guest. Matt, welcome to One Step Ahead Radio.
Thanks, Sasha. Thanks for having me.
And Matt is a special guest today because Matt has launched, together with some other very talented people, a think tank recently. I think it's not more than a couple of weeks old, but I know that thoughts about this have been going around for a long time for you guys. And it's called, if I'm not mistaken, Arketa Institute, yeah? And that's
correct, yeah.
And Matt, could you tell us a bit about your background, who you are, and also a bit about the institute that recently has been launched? I mean, despite all of this, negative energy coming out of different parts of the world, this is a positive one. So we want to make it as successful as we can. Yeah, please, Matt.
Yeah, thanks. Sure. I'll give you a little bit of my story. My name is Matt Orsagh. I live in the United States in Central Virginia. My partners in this endeavor are Anastasia Lin, she's in Switzerland, and Steve Rocco, he is in France. And Arketa Institute came into our thoughts maybe about a year and a half ago. I'll back up a little bit and give you kind of where I'm coming from. I've spent most of my career in the world of finance. I joke with people, one useless undergraduate degree wasn't good enough for me, so I got two useless undergraduate degrees. I was an English major and a film major back about 25, 30 years ago. And I did that because I'm kind of a storyteller. I like stories, so that's where I was coming from. But after a couple of years of working in the world, I realized I probably needed to get a little bit more education in business and finance. Went back and got my MBA in finance. And while I was getting my MBA in finance, one of my professors was a CFA charter holder, and our curriculum was a CFA curriculum. For those who don't know, the CFA is Chartered Financial Analysts Association, and they certify financial professionals all over the world. So I got my own charter. Once I got my MBA, I thought, I can get a charter. So I foolishly endeavored to get a CFA charter, which is I think you can take it more quickly now, but back then it was 3 tests over 3 years.
Yeah.
So after I passed the first test, I was like, oh crap, I have to keep doing this. And so I luckily passed the 3 tests in 3 years and became a CFA charter holder. I was in New York at the time. I was working for a corporate governance rating firm called Governance Metrics International. And that was really the start of incorporating governance into the investment process. E and the S of ESG was just starting at that time, but it wasn't really as interesting to investors as governance. In 2005, I joined the CFA Institute because as an employee, they were just starting this thing called the Center for Financial Market Integrity, and it was the think tank arm inside the CFA Institute. And I started working on corporate governance and sustainability issues. And actually, my first assignment was to be part of the meetings that led to the PRI, Principles of Responsible Investment.
Yeah.
In 2005, 2006. And that was really the start of ESG and sustainability. So that's kind of setting the table where I'm coming from. My career followed sustainability, followed where ESG and sustainability went. And so I was at CFA Institute for 17 years doing research, writing, speaking on these issues. And I really didn't come across, what Arketa. I'm sorry, I mispronounced my own company's name. Arketa.
Yeah, but that's fine. I mean, you're going to have a lot of opportunities to do that. So
I will, and I'm sure I'll mispronounce it again. But the ecological economics and degrowth or a post-growth economic world are what Arketa is trying to do. What we're trying to do is normalize the conversations around these topics, and we'll talk about a little bit more about what those are. But I was deep into my finance career, and I had never heard of these things.
No,
I'd never heard of finance, for ecological economics. I'd never heard of degrowth and post-growth. And at first, I had heard of degrowth, and I thought, well, that's a terrible word. That sounds terrible. I don't want anything to do with that. It sounds like having a depression on purpose, just to kind of right size the ecology of the world. And I said, no, I don't want that. But then I started digging deeper into it and what is behind degrowth, what are the policies in a degrowth world, what is ecological economics about? And it made a lot of sense. Yeah. And so the three of us come from we had similar stories where we kind of had the revelation that, this is a better way to do economics. This is a better way to do finance. Because the neoclassical economics that we all learned, that I learned in my MBA, and most people learn, doesn't really take into account the energy and materials that needs to go into producing much of anything, and the waste that comes out of that. The most famous waste is carbon dioxide. Yeah. But it could be plastics waste. It could be anything. And our neoclassical economics doesn't really consider those things. Yeah. And ecological economics does, which of course in our mind makes it a better model. And
but
so
just to break in here, I mean, just for the people listening, I mean, look, it's like our world is ruled by classical economic theories and also practice. So why do you think that there is so little, I mean, in a normal sort of educational, universities around the world, all the big financial the courses around the world, I don't know how much ecological economics gets space. I mean, my understanding is that there are a lot of financial analysts and financial professionals around the world. They don't even know what this is. Or if they know, they don't have many places they can discuss this.
Yeah, well, I think that's just the way our culture has grown, in our financial culture, our economic culture. And, it's so ingrained in the way we do things that it's hard to change. To back up even more, before, either of us were born, how did this come around? How did this come about? And when you start digging, it's an interesting story, in that if you look back through human history, we really weren't chasing growth the way we do now for much of human history. And there's a couple of things that happened about the 1920s and 1930s. There's this great quote from, I forget the gentleman's name, but he was an investment banker on Wall Street, and I forget the exact quote, but it's in our paper. But I forget the exact quote, but he was saying, and this is like 1929 or 2029. I don't know if it was right before or just at the beginning of the Great Depression. And he was a Wall Street banker. And the quote is something to the effect of, we need to change the American people's perceptions of we need to change people's wants into their needs. We need to tap into their unmet desires and sell them those things. So and
sell them dreams. Sell them dreams. Yeah.
So right about that time was the beginning of advertising. We think of advertising as just part of our daily lives. Yeah. But it wasn't the way it is today back then. It's interesting to look at those stories, and the first advertising, when people had newspapers to read, because there wasn't, of course, no television, radio, when advertising started, it was very quaint. People just trying to sell things because they worked or you needed them. It wasn't trying to sell you a lifestyle or anything like that.
No.
And the other thing that in I think it was 1935, 36, the U.S. government commissioned an economist named Simon Kuznets to better measure how our economics and our economic output. And he came up with GDP, gross domestic product, which is something we just take for granted as how we measure our success as a country now. Any country. You look at the back of the Economist magazine, and it's GDP and who's performing well and who's not. But that was never part of the human endeavor until about the 1930s. And GDP just aggregates everything that we produce and puts a price on it. So think about it. If you smoke cigarettes, that's great for GDP. If you buy a lot of cigarettes, that's great for GDP. If you get lung cancer and have to go to the hospital and have costly procedures to deal with your lung cancer, that's great for GDP, because you're spending on healthcare. Well, of course, both things are terrible for you and not good for the society. Another example is you pay someone to You pay a babysitter or a place to take your children to watch them during the day, and that's good for GDP. But if you have a family member or a community that takes care of them, that's bad for GDP. Well, of course, that's not the way it is. It's fine, and it's actually that may be building community, or looking at the health care of a neighbor or a loved one. That doesn't add anything to GDP. So in that context, that's bad that you're doing that.
Yeah.
So and then over time, that grew into, well, we want to measure this growth, and we want more growth, and we're all measuring GDP, and that's, if you step back and look at it and think about it, that's how politicians get elected. That's how CEOs get raises, is promising and delivering on growth. And to get back to ecological economics, I know I'm talking well, but I'm bringing it back to this point. To get back to ecological economics, the father of ecological economics, Herman Daly, created what he called an empty world or a full world, looking at the world. Back when we were hunters and gatherers, 10,000 years ago, we would use the resources of a place, and then we'd move on. And as we moved on, the river, that we had dirtied, and the crops we had used, and the animals that we had killed to eat, came back, regenerated. And we move on to a new place. And that was okay because the world was relatively empty, in Daly's words, an empty world. But now we live in a full world. And so we're pushing up against planetary boundaries. And if people don't know about the planetary boundaries framework, I suggest they look it up. But it shows we're pushing past 6 of 9 natural systems that measure the health of our world. And that's really our life support system.
Yeah, Matt, just a second on this one.
Yeah, sure.
When you talk about planetary boundaries, and I've been, doing this also for many years, and you talk to people about that, people can in cognitive way, they can understand that, but they don't see it, they don't feel it, because their life, most of the people, I'm not saying everybody, many people in developing countries, poor countries, they feel these planetary boundaries being breached. But I'm talking about the people in the West, mid-class citizen of any Western society. They can listen to you, but they can say, I mean, come on, the world goes on. I mean, everything works as it does. I mean, it's no problem. What's your take on that? Why is it so difficult for people to actually take this on, that we are really much dependent of the systems that's supporting the existence of our species on this planet?
Well, I think that's human nature. And that's what we're trying to break through. I mean, education and knowledge can hopefully break through those barriers. We live, think about the lives we live in, Western civilization now. We've lived better lives than anyone has ever lived, more comfortable lives, more convenient lives. But that convenience comes with a price of us not really understanding how our world works. Like, we live, where I live in Virginia, we live out in the country a little ways, and we have chickens and ducks, and we get the eggs from the chickens, and we have, part of one of my daughter's projects is we have a goat, and we have a mama goat that just had babies, and we get milk from the goat. And, I grew up in the suburbs, and I didn't know any of these things. I knew how, milk was made and how my eggs came to me and all this stuff, but I didn't think about it. They just appeared in the market. And so we've been very much removed from the natural world. And we don't think about where these things come from. Think about all the systems we have in our lives, from our plumbing to our energy to our food, that 100 years ago, people had to really understand where these things came from, and were active in getting these things.
No, we don't need to do that now. We have a Volt and Uber, and we have all of the convenience.
Right. So people, it's understandable that people don't really think about these things, and I don't blame them. But that the way our lives are this way, the way our lives are now, we often don't have to. So we've become complacent, in that we don't think about these things. And so, the planetary boundaries show us that we live in what Herman Daly called a full world, where we're bumping up again and even pushing past the safe zones into the danger zone of climate and biodiversity loss and our fresh water and our land. And what we're saying is, look, we need to get back to the safe zone. This isn't some kind of political statement, or this isn't anti-capitalist. This is just survival.
And this is exactly the point that I wanted to sort of bring in this your new institute, Arketa Institute, into this sort of a play or the story part that you're telling right now. Because I read your white paper, which I found very interesting. And of course, some of the things in the white paper are interesting from a perspective of this is not about politics, this is about survival. And people need to sort of take away that political connotation that sometimes sustainability, especially nowadays in the US, has, maybe in some other parts of the world too. But you were sort of going back to your institute. What's the sort of a core motivation for this that you guys are sharing? What do you, I mean, education, I guess, is one part, but it's also providing a bit of a safe space for discussion in a non-confrontative way. Is that sort of what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah. Broadly, our mission is to normalize this conversation.
Yeah.
No, because as I said, we didn't come across these concepts. We didn't come across these ideas till very late in our careers. Well, Steve and I are in our 50s, and Anastasia is in her early 30s. So she's come across it earlier in her life, but we came across it late in our careers. And what we want to do is provide something that wasn't there when we were around, when we were coming up. And if I had come across this information 20 years ago, I would have had a very different career. I would have made different decisions. Mm-hmm. And so one, it's education and knowledge and putting this information in front of people. And, once you know this, you can't unknow it. You can't unsee it. You can put your head in the sand and decide that you're not going to deal with it, but that's a personal choice. But for many people, they just don't know. And so, it's to educate and put this information out there. And so we have these conversations with financial professionals, with legal professionals, with policymakers. And it's more in people's understanding of what's going on. But as you said, it's to provide a safe space to have these conversations. I know I'm going to a meeting in a couple of weeks, and I'm meeting with some degrowth people in that city, and there's little pockets of people who are following degrowth or meet around degrowth. Yeah. And I'm going to a conference in the city, and I'm going there, and I'm going to be talking to them. And there's one or two people who are attending, and they don't want to advertise that they're attending because they don't want their firm to know
that
what
they
they're
are
doing.
participating in this. So it's contagious a bit as well. I mean, it sounds like they're scared.
Well, but think about it. Think about what we're saying, because our report is, the first part of the report is kind of education about ecological economics and degrowth and what they are, and how green growth isn't really the answer, and the problems with green growth. And we walk through those things because we figure this will be new to a lot of people. The second part of the paper is really, what does this mean for finance? We're financial professionals, and it means finance is going to shrink, because we don't need the growth that we're talking about anymore. And we don't want to chase that growth because it's detrimental to our welfare in the long run. And that's hard to swallow for a lot of financial people, because it means that's, I can see how people take that as a threat to the mortgage they have to pay, the kids' education they have to save for, their retirement they have to save for, because they're in these careers that are usually pretty well paying, that we're saying that, look, that we can't do this anymore. And, we don't take any glee in this, and this isn't some, like I said, some anti-capitalist screed or anything, but it's just, this is the reality we're confronted with. We have to step off this growth for growth's sake cycle. Like, think about it, do some rudimentary math here. If we grow, your economy you're in right now, if it grows 2%, every year, which is about what people expect of developed markets and what politicians promise and CEOs promise. If we grow 2% GDP, we double the resources we use every 35 years.
Yes,
we're already past the safe zone on resource use and energy use. That's not going to turn out well. That's just going to accelerate climate change, accelerate biodiversity loss, accelerate water issues, water problems, accelerate land problems, crop problems. So it's just, let me say 1 second. The title of the paper is By Disaster or Design, because by disaster or design, a post-growth world is coming. But do we let it happen through disaster where we don't plan for it, or do we design it? And we're just saying, look, we need to design this. Come talk, let's have these conversations so we can design this. The things we've done so far we're going to have a lot of problems due to ecological crisis. We just are. Let's design our way out of as much as that as we can.
I mean, I like the approach of and title. I think it's very much telling that either we end up in disaster or we can design ourselves probably out of it. But there are these people that are still talking about the green growth. I mean, many corporates are doing that. Many people in the financial industry are still using that kind of terminology, transition or green growth, and all these other things. But what do you say about technology? People that truly believe that human species will, by this fantastic talent on technology side, manage to bridge over some of these planetary boundaries. Of course, nobody's asking about the billions that will pay price for it, but it sounds good. It's a storytelling, as you said. What's your take on that? I mean, why are we so much focusing on this hope for technological sort of solutions?
Because that's a story that's very appealing, and we
Yeah.
don't have to we don't have to change the way we live, and don't have to change the way we do things. We don't have to eat less beef and have less dairy. We don't need to drive any less. We don't need to have less vacations. We don't need to change the way we live our lives. And so it's a convenient story to tell. And it's a nice story to people to grasp, because it says, look, things will change slightly, but you're just going to be getting your energy from a different place, but everything else is going to be the same.
Yeah.
And that's a compelling story, but it just doesn't add up when you do the math.
No.
We in the paper we walk through. I think that every CEO and every financial professional should have to take a course on thermodynamics, because
That would be a very good thing. I agree. Yeah.
because that makes you understand how energy works and doesn't work, and what you can and can't do based on the laws of physics. And we have a whole chapter in the paper on, this is just physics and chemistry, and walking through what that means.
Yeah.
You can't, and the example I give is, if that meteor missed the Earth 65 million years ago, and the dinosaurs were still around, and we never came up because of the mass extinction of the dinosaurs, the laws of physics and thermodynamics would still be around. They would still rule, because they don't change. They're immutable. We can ignore them at our peril, but they don't change. But the laws of economics would not be around at all. Those are political decisions. Those are economic decisions.
It's a construct.
Those are human constructs that we have put ahead of thermodynamics and physics and chemistry, because it's convenient for our political lives and our cultural lives. But that doesn't add up, and that math doesn't add up. And so for green growth, by all means, use as green of energy as you can, but step back and use less of it. And we walk through what does that mean to a degrowth path to a more post-growth world. It doesn't mean going back and living in caves, as people sometimes
that's normal. What the people are I mean,
try to scaremonger people. But,
yes.
But if you look at it, about 50 years ago, in the early 1970s, was the first time humanity started using more materials and more energy than we could regenerate. So it's not, in the grand scheme of life on Earth, in the grand scheme of human life even, that's very recent. So we could go back to, changing our transportation. We go through, we have a chapter on systems thinking and systems, and we walk through the example of the beef and dairy industries because those are industries that touch a lot of our planetary boundaries, whether it's climate or water use or land use, and saying, look, if we step back slightly from our use of this resource, it could have profound positive impacts. Now, that doesn't mean everyone has to become a vegan and no one can ever eat a cheeseburger again. It's just, as a society, deciding we're going to pull back from this industry and this cultural thing a little bit, maybe 10 to 15% pull back on what we do. And that would have huge ramifications in the positive way for all these systems, because all these systems are connected. And so those kind of changes, those kind of policies are things we need to talk about and think about. And just making everything green will have a huge negative impact on mining and the use of land and water that are just going to make those issues worse. It's just going to shift the problem to something else,
Yeah, we're
while
pushing
not
the
really
cart.
solving the problem.
Yeah, we're pushing the cart to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. That's basically what we're doing. But Matt, in terms of the response, I mean, look, this is a bold move. I think what you're doing is very interesting. As you said, ideas have been around. Now you're making a think tank institute around that, which I think it's the timing has never been better, given what's going on. What has been the response so far? I mean, from the people you've been talking to.
Well, we launched the institute about a month ago. So as you said, we haven't been around very long. We've been talking about this and working on it for quite a while. Um, it's mixed, and that's to be expected.
Yeah,
I when I talk to people about what I do and what we're doing, I get kind of three different responses. One, maybe a third of people, and this is just anecdotal, and Steve and
yeah,
Anastasia probably say the same. About a third of people understand what we're doing and are supportive. Say, oh, that's a good idea. Another third, roll their eyes or walk away or
yeah,
politely disagree or disagree vehemently. It's like, well, but that gets into the story, that they're telling, and I understand where they're coming from. Like I said, they've got the mortgage and the kids
yeah,
and
yeah.
retirement. And one of the things we confront in the report is that this is, the last part of the report. The first part of the report is the education about the issues. The second part of the report is about the financial industry and how it needs to change. And the third part of the report is really talking about how big of a cultural shift this is for people, and we understand that. This is tied up in people's identities. Capitalism
Yes,
is, and
yes,
the way our world works, and our culture, and our politics, and our economics. That is in your identity if you're living in the world,
yes.
and we understand that's a challenge to that, and that's confrontational, and that's not comfortable a lot of the time. And you could say it's kind of the 7 stages of grief people have to go through, something like
Yeah.
that. They're going to be in denial at first, and they get to acceptance at some point, or they don't. And so that other third of people, who are roll their eyes or walk away, I don't think we're going to reach. But I found there's a middle third who they hear what I'm talking about, or they hear what we're talking about. They haven't really heard about it before. They don't really know about
No.
these things, and that's who we're trying to reach. And they're convincible because they understand the physics and the chemistry. If they go back to high school physics or college physics, and they understand what the planetary boundaries. Once they know them, they make sense. Once they see what ecological economics is, they make sense. When they look at the policies behind degrowth, they make sense. And so when they think about it, it makes sense. You
Mhm.
know, to, we used to think the sun revolved around the earth, and that was the truth to everyone. And then we learned differently, and we
Yeah.
thought, well, this is a better story. This is a better model. I'm going to use this one, and that's all that's what we're trying to do is get those people
No.
in the
Yeah.
middle who don't really understand just because they haven't been exposed to this, what's
No, I
really going
admire.
on.
Yeah, I admire the mission you are on because it is, as you say, it's an educational part, but it's also the part of identity of the people, that around the world that living comfortable lives and they have to take care of their daily, dues in many ways. But I'm also, it would not come as a surprise if I ask you, because this is the institute and think tank that is registered in the US. You are US based, if I understand that correctly. I mean, given the fact that what's going on in the US now, it will be almost impossible for me not to ask you about what's really going on. But we don't need to go into the too much of a detail. But I guess, just the top of your head, do you think that this is going to change? I mean, the conflict that is embedded in what's going on in U.S. with sustainability in general, sort of a development of accountability around the world, it's tremendous. What's your take on it?
Well, the technical aspects of it, we are registered in the U.S. just because that's where we started, but we'll
Yeah,
also be registered in Switzerland because it just makes sense to have two
yeah,
poles. Because as we grow, and hopefully we will, we'll bring on more people, and they'll be on both sides of the Atlantic. So it makes sense. That structure makes sense.
mm,
But I've been in the sustainability world for a long time, and I've seen these ups and downs. And I've seen where sustainability first started out, thinking back to being part of the PRI in those meetings. Internally in the sustainability world, there was great excitement and great promise. And of course, there was pushback to that, and things didn't deliver what people thought they were going to deliver. We had a lot of greenwashing from companies and from investors, and there's been ebbs and flows. And this is no different. You can say this is a big ebb because there's a lot of pushback on sustainability. But getting back to, the title of our paper is By Disaster Design, because the disaster is on its way. And no political machinations are going to change that. It's just physics and chemistry. And so it behooves us to understand the issues, understand what's coming, and do something about it. And we want to arm people with knowledge, and it's going to be up to them what they do with it. We're going to have issues because of climate change and because of biodiversity loss and because of land use issues, because of water issues, and so on, walking down the list of planetary boundaries that we've breached. Those things are coming. Those problems are coming. But we want people to be prepared as they can for them.
Yeah, you have as you sort of alluded to that in this in intro when we did that. I mean, the question of externality is not being priced, and as not priced, they are actually not part of the fabric of economic system that we run. And this is something that people need to understand, but also they need to get ideas on at least ideas and be able to discuss how we can solve this without being scared of going back to the Stone Age and living in caves and stuff like that, which is the normal sort of a argument from people that are supporting the current system, which is not a big surprise to none of us. Nevertheless, I mean, this is your first white paper. What's your plan? What are your plans going forward? What do you want to focus on?
Well, we have quite a bit of things we're thinking of doing. We're talking in late April in 2025. In the fall, we want to put out a survey of financial professionals. We already have the survey done. It's written, but we're going to need to partner with trade associations and folks in the financial world to get people to take the survey. And the purpose of the survey is to kind of set the level of where financial professionals around the world are with these issues and where they're not with these issues. And we would expect them to be quite uninformed on these issues, as we were ourselves, 5 or 6 years ago. And what does that mean? What's the gap between the understanding of these issues and the understanding of what needs to be done and what's actually happening? And that's an interesting story to tell. Yeah. Now, if we're pleasantly surprised and people are more informed about these things than we thought, that's another interesting story to tell. But the survey, we want to kind of set a baseline of where are people coming from. And then after that, our next paper we're thinking of doing that would probably come out about the same time next year. Our idea is to kind of have 2 big projects per year. Okay. And that really tackles the question of kind of the pension question, the 401k question here, if you're here in the States.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Because that's the first question people have is, okay, how does this affect my pension? Because I need to invest in stocks and bonds that are always going up. Yeah. In an economy that's growing 2% a year, if you take that away, what happens? And so we want to tackle that head on. And there's been some research on that and talk about, and again, it's the same kind of discussion. It's like, okay, what is reality? What is the expectation of reality that doesn't line up with reality? And what does that mean? What does that mean? What does that mean culturally? What does that mean to identity? What does that mean to, people's hopes and fears about the future? All those things, because we can't duck that question. And so that's the next project. After that, we're kind of kicking around some ideas. We might do something about insurance and reinsurance industries, because that's kind of the canary in the coal mine.
That's a canary in the coal mine, yes, because they are right now in many places in the world they're screaming. Yeah.
Yes. But so we have a lot of road ahead of us, and in the meantime, we're going to be out speaking at universities. The phrase I use is from the classroom to the boardroom. We want to be talking with everyone who wants to talk to us. We assume some of them will be yelling at us and telling us that we're crazy, but that's fine. We want to have those conversations and normalize this conversation. That's our mission statement. Normalize this conversation in financial spaces around the world. And when we first started thinking about doing this, we thought we might do it more broadly than just focusing on finance. And we need to talk about policy. We need to talk about legal. We need to talk about these big other industries in our culture. But we thought, we know finance. That's where we come from. Let's stick to that. But we hope that in the future, these conversations are having about, what is a degrowth world legally? Is that even, is running an economy in a post-growth way even legal in where you come from? In some ways, not. In some ways, it won't be. What does that mean for policy?
Yeah,
and what needs to change? And so, we hope these conversations we're having will spur those conversations, and maybe a year or two from now, a think tank in a post-growth world, a legal post-growth think tank is started up. So that's kind of where we want to push these conversations. And we started the think tank because, I'm sorry to interrupt. We started the think tank because there wasn't one. You go to Washington or Brussels or these places where they have think tanks, and most of them are, if you go to Washington D.C., you're going to have a dozen pro-growth think tanks, and that makes sense. But there wasn't one doing this kind of work that we think needs to be done, because we need to balance that conversation.
Matt, many thanks. I think this vertical, if we talk about a think tank covering financial industry and its role in this, is very important. It's insightful. Thanks for a great conversation. I think I will, of course, definitely follow your work. And, if there is anything you would like to say to people listening to One Step Ahead Radio, I think you already mentioned many of the things, but if you want to add something, you can do it now. I think it's a fantastic that it's coming out now. It's needed, as we know, given the state of the world as it is. But it also creates a lot of hope that there are probably many people out there that are looking for education, insights, and place where they can actually get information and also discuss things.
Yeah, I would say reach out if you want to talk to us. We're all on LinkedIn. We could easily be found on LinkedIn. I'm the only Matt Orsagh in the world, so I can't hide anywhere. You can find me on LinkedIn or social media. I have a Substack where I write about degrowth issues as well. Check out what we're doing at Arketa, or sorry, I mispronounced it again, Arketa Institute. Read the paper. If you disagree with something or want to learn more about something, reach out to us. If you have, as I said, from the classroom to the boardroom, if you want to talk to us or have us come and talk with you, we're more than happy to. If you want to learn more, reach out to us, share the paper with other people, and just become part of this conversation.
Matt, many thanks. All the best. And we'll probably have another session next year so we can hear about what's going on and how much are you progressing in what you're doing. Many thanks. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Sasha.